Right, here we go. Good morning, Mitchell. Good morning, Louise.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dewald. Good morning, Louise. Thank you for having me.
It's a great pleasure. And if you heard an aeroplane, they are putting out all the prevention measures for false codling moth and Mediterranean fruit fly in the Hex River Valley, which is where I live. So yes, factors from outside do come in and make themselves known. But welcome, Mitchell. This is hugely exciting for us to have the opportunity to give a platform for you to speak about Vision260, CGA's Vision260. And yes, please go ahead.
No, thank you very much, Louise. I was just saying in the introductions that it's my 50th year now with the Citrus Growers Association, but in the industry for a very long time. I think I joined, my first initiation into the citrus industry was in 1998, working in the Durban port at the Durban Export Terminal. So it's been a long journey. And I was saying that Vision260 is very exciting for me because it's reinvigorated my energy into the industry, because we have to have a vision to achieve our objectives. And I think everybody's very well acquainted with a lot of the logistics and shipping issues that are currently surfacing. So this gives us opportunity to really reach out to industry and stakeholders to come together and take this industry forward, looking at how to address a lot of the logistics and shipping challenges, and then obviously take the industry forward to what represents the Vision260 and potentially the industry growing from 164 million cartons, which was exported last year, to potentially 260 million cartons sometime in the future. So it's really going to be requiring a lot of energy and focus and collaboration amongst our industry to achieve these objectives, overcome the constraints, and obviously achieve the objectives which Vision260 I'm going to display to you in the course of the series that we're going to run through Lucentlands. Thank you.
Thanks for having us to do that, Mitchell. We really appreciate that.
Yes, and I must just emphasize, I've been watching Lucentlands, and obviously Louise and I go back a long way, and I've been watching the journey of Lucentlands, and I watch all of your podcasts and all of your morning series, and I really find it very interesting, and I think it's coming at a very good time as well. Yeah, and your coverage is really good. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think, as we've said many times on this podcast, I think port is a swear word in the fruit industry at the moment. What's the latest? I know I follow your updates on the WhatsApp channel, and I've spoken about it. But what's the news as of today?
Yes, so I think let's cover that first off before you get into Vision260, because it will be essentially a part of Vision260, the current constraints we're seeing in the port. So let's go back a few years and start from then, and quickly give you a high level understanding of what's happened now. So I've been very fortunate enough in my position to be engaging with Transnet over a course of, I would say, a good decade. So right through the Transnet structures, right from senior people, right down to people who work at operational level. And I've been engaging with Transnet on various online platforms. On the onset of COVID, we were fortunate enough to have daily meetings and weekly and monthly meetings with Transnet, and really down to operational level. And from that point, I became sensitized to the fact that there are some real challenges happening in Transnet. Through particularly its rail and port network in the form of the National Ports Authority operations and the Transnet port terminal operations. And from them, in 2018, I actually wrote an article which then opened up the focus on Transnet, because I saw these issues coming where it was very well aware of the fact that over a period of time, the investment that needed to be made in Transnet, and let's talk specifically on that point, Transnet port terminals, where equipment, the midlife servicing, which should have been done, wasn't taking place. The replacement of key equipment wasn't taking place, and the maintenance was failing. And that started at that point, and then I really became sensitized that we're going into a deep dive with Transnet, and it's not a very good outlook. And from that point, I was making our industries and other industries aware that this challenge is going to surface, like what we're seeing in Eskom, in SA, all the other state-owned enterprises. Transnet was not unspared, but obviously not in our direct focus. When the lights go off, we know there's a challenge with Eskom. When planes don't fly, we know there's a challenge with SAA. But ports sit and don't sit really in our face, so we don't know what was happening. But now we do. I think across many platforms, everybody should know that Transnet's in a very, very precarious state, and it's going to take a good bit of energy and a lot of finances to get that back on track. So the current state of play is really across all the ports. Let's talk about ports directly. We can leave the rail to maybe another session on the Vision 260. There's a lot of information on rail. We can cover that at that point. But obviously the ports, since you've asked, the ports being Durban Pier 1, Pier 2, multi-purpose terminal, PE container terminal, Kuga container terminal, Cape Town container terminal, are all suffering the same issue, and that's really just around the equipment that's failing. This is highly technical, very specialized equipment that needs a lot of maintenance. It needs to have its maintenance schedules kept to. Once you start to breach that, it starts to catch up with you, and that's where we are at the moment in that deep dive, where the cycle has gone down so bad that it's going to take a lot to catch up. So what we do understand is I've seen from Transnet the procurement on equipment right across the port system. We are at least in a 2 or 3 year cycle to get that back on track, to get the right equipment in the ports, to get our productivity levels to international standards. Where at the moment we're seeing it between 30 to 50% across the different ports on an international basis. So it's catching up with us, particularly on what I'm seeing on imports, because the ships that are standing for weeks on end outside ports, you can't get your commodities in to keep manufacturing plants running, to keep shops stocked. It's a very big problem. And it's now come to a real head. As of December, sort of November, December last year, there was about 30 ships off Durban, just container ships for that matter. And then Cape Town wasn't at that point too bad, but it's sitting now with 9 ships this morning. And Kuga PE seems to be doing relatively okay, with only 2 or 3 ships standing at the moment. On the export side, things are still moving. You must remember when a ship comes, it discharges, loads, and goes. So the main hindrance on our port side has been imports, but the exports, it has been slow, so the ships aren't leaving as fast as they can, but the exports are still taking place. So at the moment on the fruit side, Cape Town is really where the brunt of the fruit is being exported, as you know, from the Western Cape, being in the deciduous season right now and the peak season. It's been now about the 3rd or 4th year where Cape Town has been a very big challenge, really around the equipment and lack of productivity. It's so bad that we're hearing that the crane moves, which should internationally be between 25 and 30 cranes, so that there should be 30 containers moving off the cranes at every hour. They're doing less than 10, peaking to about 12. So it's very, very bad. Coupled to that, there's been a significant uptake in the wind disruptions in Cape Town this year. We've known that Cape Town in this season is very pandemic prone to wind stoppages, but that's becoming more prone. In fact, I think it's now this week, end of last week, about 240 somewhat hours additional to last year lost to wind. That's very, very disruptive. And obviously with the crane outages and breakdowns on the equipment side and the productivity, it's just caused a bottleneck, and it's been persistent since December last year, and obviously it's having an impact on the fruit being able to be exported to market. And luckily, and I'll give it to the industry, they were saying they were looking at contingency, so you're seeing a lot of fruit flow through Walvis Bay, which is quite good to see. You're seeing fruit moving up now to the PE container terminal, up to the NCT Kuga container terminal, probably as far as Durban as well, and then obviously FBT break bulk. We're really seeing on about 5 or 6 ships coming in, and there's about 8 to 10 planned. So the contingency are in place, but certainly it doesn't cover the industry well for its primary focus to get through the main terminals, get to market. So that's really where it stands.
I had a brief chat last night at my kid's school. One of the grape exporters from the X-River Valley, his kids is in the same school as us. And I quickly stopped him in the hall and said, "How's it going? Are you guys okay?" He says he's now putting his containers on a connecting ship in Cape Town. That ship is taking it to PE. It's then loaded onto the container vessel that goes to Rotterdam. And it's costing him R3 per box to do it like that, versus R17 per box to truck it straight from the X to PE.
Yeah. And when you say per box, that's per carton, eh? Not
Per
container.
carton,
So
yes.
it's
Yes.
£3
yeah.
a box. Let me tell you something. It adds up. It doesn't sound like a lot, but let me tell you, it can be a profitable loss making situation. That's that £3 a carton. Yes. So the MSC shaker is the one that moves between Cape Town and Kuchen, and it's used as a transshipment vessel, primarily to work around the wind situation. And that vessel actually is calling it FPT. Funny enough, it's not even going to the Cape Town container terminal.
Yeah.
It's going to a private terminal, FPT. For most cases, it goes between the two terminals, and then it goes to Kuchen, and from there they can ship to Europe or Far East or Middle East. So, yeah, it's a countermeasure for the current circumstances.
Well, at least there's something that's working a bit.
So
Yes,
a
yes.
question,
Oh, well,
a question, and that is all the problems and inefficiencies and things you described. Yes, we know them. But is there anything that can be done about the wind?
I'll tell you, Louise, it's actually very worrying for me because we sat with the CSIR in July in Cape Town. That's last year. And they gave us at least a 20-year forecast on the wind impacts, and was focusing mainly on Cape Town. In fact, it was looking at various regions around the world, and it was showing about 3 key regions globally which are going to become very susceptible to weather pattern changes. And that's definitely Southern Africa. And then obviously we were looking at the wind, but it also was looking at the rainfall. So there were some very concerning stats in there. So we mustn't only consider wind. There's other issues which should come, which is going to be swells because of higher seas and very high winds and heavy rains, which we've seen in the Western Cape over the last 2 or 3 years with all those, those flooding. But the immediate recovery for wind disruption. Let's hope so. The immediate recovery for the weather disruption is productivity. So if the terminal was able to achieve 25 to 30 gross crane moves per hour, they could recover very, very quickly to the lost downtime. But because the productivity is sitting where it is, there is actually no recovery. It kind of takes too long. And then when they start to recover, then the wind starts to come back into it again. But certainly they're looking, the Rajesh Dana, the port manager of Cape Town, is looking to partner again with the CSR, and there's some international people coming to study it. I've gone to Cape Town Terminal and looked at Devil's Peak, and that's exactly what it is. It's Devil's Peak. It's from what I can see when the southeaster blows, it's causing a vortex situation where it's catapulting high level wind speeds and into low level wind speeds and pushing it down straight into the terminal. So there's no real measure you're going to have to counteract that. You can put up structures and things like that, but certainly I don't think that's going to have any impact because it's coming from a high vortex straight to a low, and that's where your wind speed is picking up to 120 kilometers an hour. And people are talking about equipment in the port being more prone to being tolerant of high wind speeds. I'm very skeptical of that. 120 kilometer hour winds, I don't think there's going to be machines that are going to be able to withstand that. And the massive wind. I've been at the terminal when it's been 100 kilometers an hour. It's an unbelievable situation.
She's like, and other
they've got to look at something. Yeah, other options, maybe ports, other points, Walvis Bay, or not Walvis, but they're looking at Saldanha and those sort of things. But how practical that is another question. So we've got to come up with something very, very soon. Let's hope we find the answers.
Yeah, but even if they go Saldanha, or even like the other closest port is Mossel Bay, which I don't think is deep enough. It's you sit with the infrastructure problem. It's also going to take a couple of years to get that in place for loading and
the cost of
offloading.
it, which we know there's no cost, there's no money for that. Saldanha is a very dirty port. There's iron ore that floats around there. It's not conducive for that container activity, particularly fruit. So a lot of people are talking about it, but that's really where my sentiment is. They're talking also about maybe just northwards of the coast. Like the Kucha port was developed a complete new project, maybe something like that. But again, yeah, let's see where it goes.
So I think you've done a very good job of sketching the problem. Maybe it would be good for you to unpack a little bit of the Vision260's. How is CGA looking at trying to mitigate the problems?
So that's where Vision 260 for me is such a essential element of our industry at the moment. And that's where I would call on people to really get behind Vision 260 and let's work together to unpack it so that it works for everybody. It's no good us as the Citrus Growers Association sitting here and pushing some sort of vision into the industry. We've got to all buy into it. I've studied for many years a lot of the practical solutions on where we should be going to implement. So Vision 260 is really around looking at the different challenges right from the farm all the way to market. And let's unpack what we're likely to see around challenges with the extra growth that's coming into the system. And let's find out what key projects we need to implement to carry that growth. Look, not only carrying the growth, but looking at some of the constraints and how do we overcome those constraints. And it's right, it's not any ports. The ports you will see at the moment seems to be a concern, but let me tell you, that's not the biggest problem. And when we go into Vision 260, you're going to see, I'm going to unpack for you where the biggest problem actually is. And how we're going to solve that is going to be a very interesting development.
Great.
But yeah, as I say, let's work together, and I'm sure we can do it if we put our minds together.
Should I put it on the screen for you, Mitchell?
Yes, let's go for it. So put it on the screen. Let's talk about where this comes from. So as I mentioned to you, we've known, and anybody who crisscrosses the country can see that the growth in citrus plantings has been very substantial, and we've been able to quantify it in the tree census data. So I haven't seen the current tree census data of 2023, but certainly I would imagine there's over 100,000 hectares which have been planted, which is about 10,000 hectares more than 2 years ago. So a lot of young trees are in the ground, and those are starting to now, being harvested and produced, particularly on the lemons and late mandarins. So we're in the cycle of growth, and I'm going to show you very interestingly where we should be in terms of volume. So Vision 260 forms part of 8 key projects. We sat 2 years ago with the CGA board and some key stakeholders, and we thought, okay, what do we need to focus on in unpacking Vision 260? So what I'm going to present is really just the shipping and logistics portion of it, but there's another portion around market access, about opening up markets and making sure the markets are growing and retaining and optimized to make sure the product is entering there. So perhaps we can get Justin or Precious onto this platform as well, because that's also a very key part of Vision 260. The information that we need to circulate to industry that we're building as well, information platforms, and then obviously the communication. So this is just one part of it. And then obviously there's a bigger shipping project as well. So Vision 260, if we go, am I able to control the presentation?
Yes, you control it. You control it on your side.
All right. Are you seeing it in presentation mode?
No, it's just showing a PowerPoint on the side.
Okay, I've got it on my side in actual PowerPoint presentation mode. I don't know if you're controlling it, maybe.
No, you've got the control completely over the actual.
We can see it. We can see it fine in PowerPoint mode. You can go ahead like that.
Okay. All right, perfect. So just to confirm, are you seeing what is showing as a key? So there's 6 different projects on the screen. All right, perfect. So you are seeing what I'm seeing. Okay, so as I mentioned to you, this what I'm going to be presenting is really around the logistics and shipping portion. As you know, that's really my sort of portfolio. But obviously, with that in mind, we've got to understand what is the long-term crop projection model, and looking at right down to regional level, what is the production output going to be, so we can see right from a regional level what we need to implement to carry the product through the port system. So we will focus today on the first one, which will be the long-term crop projection and key production output, and then subsequent sessions we can go through the different models, so we can actually have a lot more focus and a lot of time to discuss, these different projects. So some very important points to consider, as I mentioned earlier, that obviously the growth in citrus and exports is imminent. We've heard via our producers this year that we're likely to see a very substantial increase in the crop output this year. So the industry and partners, need to be part of the success and play respective roles to ensure that we attain this result of wherever it grows to. Ultimately the end result is 260 million cartons. And I believe everybody in the chain is likely to succeed with this, financially in particular. With all the amount of additional fruit coming in, there's more money to be made across the system. So if we all play our part, there's only going to be successes, but we've got to make sure that the farmer stays successful. Because obviously if there's no farmers, there's no product and there's no industry. So everyone, doesn't benefit. I do believe that as we move forward with into subsequent years, that our exporting fraternity and our key stakeholders, logistics stakeholders, are going to be central to unlocking our logistics developments, because they are the ones that are the commercial arm of the logistics chain. So they contract commercially different logistics service providers, shipping providers. So up to this point, I've done what I can in terms of influencing and facilitating, but we really now need to get the commercial implementation of key projects, which we're going to focus on in these sessions coming up. And we're looking at creating a more efficient and effective logistics chain. Hopefully, also, looking at how we can get cost reduction in our logistics chain. So it's going to be very important for industry partners to work together and cooperate to unlock logistics and shipping potential, because it's going to require a lot of different stakeholders to create the economies of scale to get these projects implemented. So that's really going to be an essential part of Vision 260. So let's go into the actual crop projection model and regional production output. Do you have a comment, Louise, before I carry on?
No, please do.
Perfect. Okay, let's go. Okay, so if we look at the long-term crop projection model, and this comes from a model which has been handed down to Paul Hardman, and at the moment Precious Konato is running with this data. So it takes a lot of different information and projects this volume. A lot of systems are behind us driving it. So if we have a look at each of the commodities, and I've broken it down to the main sort of commodity groups, being your grapefruit, your lemons, your navels, your late mandarins, and Valencias. So as you can see there, from 2023, it shows last year 165 million cartons, and then you can look at the growth rate. If you look at the green bar, certainly on the lemons, and the orange bar, which is your late mandarins, that's really where a lot of the growth is actually come from.
Sorry, Mitchell, did you skip the slide already?
I've gone to the long-term crop projection model. Is that what you're seeing at the moment?
No,
we're still seeing the first one. So just see if you can maybe move it to there.
Yes, I can't seem to change the screen on
Just give me a second. I've got it open on my side. Let me just put it in here.
We'll win with the technology in a moment.
You probably find that's now going to move it over, because I was in presenter mode.
Okay. We are seeing it there. Yes.
Oh, there we go. I see it. Yes, there we go.
Yeah. Let me see if I can get into presenter mode, because a lot of the numbers, people would like to look at the numbers. Yes, you should be seeing it now in presenter mode.
Same. It's still the normal view on my side.
Okay. It's unfortunately that's technology, I guess.
Okay, so we can just move it on as you need. But now we can see it. Okay.
Yes, so as I said, if you look at the 2023, there you'll see the 160 million cartons, and then growing forward. Now, what the model showed us 2 or 3 years back was a continuous cycle of planting. And that's where the 260 million cartons came from. But now we all understand there's been some economic challenges, and obviously with the logistics challenges and marketing challenges, the production growth has now started to stagnate. So the outlook of 260 is actually now being rebased to about 230, 240 million cartons to, as you see, 2032. But should we see the cycle change, we're likely to see the growth rate starting to increase and then going towards that Vision 260. So we've kept it as Vision 260, although our ultimate vision is showing up to about 230 million cartons. So there's going to be 2 phases of the Vision 260. The first phase will be the next 5 years, so going to about 2027. And then from 2027, we'll reevaluate, rebase based on the current numbers at that time, and then have another sort of outlook on the projection going into 2032. So what I'm going to show you right now is really just looking at the 2032 volume of about 208 million cartons over the next 5 to 6 years. So that's really where the long-term crop projection model is looking at.
Just a question on this, Mitchell. This data, is this based on what is in the ground at the moment?
It's based exactly what's in the ground at the moment. So I've used different formulas to unpack Paul's three long-term crop projection model, and the different formulas I've used have come to exactly the same result that Paul has. And this is exactly what's in the ground: 100,000 hectares of citrus, and we've used it also at the tree age to show, obviously the growth rates and other formulas. So it's actually a very accurate model now, and I believe it's likely to materialize should should everything equalize and be in a positive cycle, we're going to see this volume materialize without a doubt.
Okay. Question from my side is CGA promoting growers to plant additional orchards, or is CGA at this stage just saying to them, just hold your horses a little bit till we've got a lot of stuff in place?
Yeah. It's a good question, actually. I don't believe, as the CGA being the association is promoting the planting of citrus. I don't believe we engaged in that directly. I think if we look at historically at the value of citrus and the pricing trends that have come back to farmers, particularly on the lemons, I take that as an example. I mean, the lemon prices that farmers were receiving a few years back was astronomical. And that cycle was in a boom for a while, maybe 2-3 seasons. And I think that's what's inspiring farmers to plant more, because obviously they see a good cycle, so they plant to catch that cycle. And I think the same on the late mandarins. You know, I think late mandarins, particularly on the varieties that you know of, the Clement Golds and Woolworths or Tangos and Checkers, the familiar ones we know of. The eating trends on that is just growing internationally. So that's also driving the growth on that. And then I think the others are just, you know, growers putting in more production to be more economically viable, because it is an economies of scale game. But I think it's very much driven by the farmers investing directly in themselves, and not any influenced by the CGA, in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Okay. So here's another very important one. You know, we've got to understand, and as I say, I've been in this industry for many years. And I've seen cycles come and cycles go. I've seen changes in our industry being positive changes or negative changes from any different angle. But let's talk about, you know, we're talking about Vision260 and 260 million cartons, but we also got to understand some of the outside influences that can negate that. You know, we've got to understand it's a perishable product. It's a product that's organic. It sits in a tree. That there's very different elements that are going to positively or negatively impact that. The other key one, which I also say to our logistics stakeholders, is that we've got to understand the risk that you have in investing into this industry. A lot of money is being invested in our industry at the moment. I'm very thankful for that, and we've had a very big part to play in that. But I've also said, you know, when you make that investment, it's not a guarantee that we're going to have that product to carry that investment. And we've seen that, particularly in Durban. Durban had a very poor year last year on the back of significant investment. So let's talk about these, so everyone understands that, you know, there are dynamics that are going to change our industry. So we understand politically, globally, we're seeing now impacts in the Middle East areas. You've seen what's happened in the Red Sea with the closure of not closure, but the diversion of ships out of the Suez Canal. You've seen the issues around Russia that we've had of late, and others around the world. Socioeconomic environment, you know, the population is growing, so we're going to see conflict. So we're likely to see these challenges coming, and how that impacts. It's actually a very interesting one, that if we look at the Panama Canal, Suez Canal impact, and the issue in the Middle East and Russia, I foresee some positive outcomes for our industry. There are certain trade lanes which are being blocked around access for certain growing regions, South America, into Europe, into Far East markets in particular. So we should be able to capture some very good opportunities there. And then there might be some challenges where, because they can't access certain markets, they're going to saturate markets which are closer that they can access. So we're going to need to watch it. That's going to be something interesting to follow through for the current year, given those dynamics. So that's kind of relates to that. We all should know about the climatic conditions. We've just spoken about it. I've seen a presentation 2 years ago after the April floods in Durban. The Minister of Agriculture came to Durban and gave us a presentation, and I saw there very clearly that Southern Africa is going to start to see some very significant climatic changes, and we're starting to see that. You've seen it in those floods in KZN, you've seen the floods in the Western Cape, and globally that's happening. So the potential of climate change we've got to understand as well, and that obviously has an impact on the production in terms of its yield and its quality and those sort of things. Market dynamics, pricing trends, I mean, that changes continuously. It's actually for me, it's always been a very interesting one around how you market fruit. You know, it's a very dynamic environment to be in. And if you consider how many countries we supply into around the world, how many different engagements I had between exporters, farmers, and those people buying fruit, it's an incredibly dynamic environment. And it's quite interesting that We actually export 163 million cartons, and we're going to obviously grow that. Pricing trends also come from one year to the next, good opportunities, not such good opportunities. So those also have a big impact on the export volume. We are seeing some very significant changes in our bilateral trade agreements, tariffs and duties. I think everyone's well aware. You've heard Louise mention the false coding moth issues, the black spot issues. There's a lot of pressure internationally around these sort of things. So it's one to follow very closely and see how we can adapt to those different changes in those grand tariffs and duties as well. Also going to start to have an impact. And then just one which is servicing is the carbon tariffs coming from Europe. Not quite so much in our environment at the moment, but certainly over time it's likely to start to come into effect. Economic environment, cost and exports. That is a very significant one that we've had a lot of discussion over the last few years. Economically, it's becoming very, very tight for our farmers to make money and remain sustainable. I did a very good presentation at a forum quite recently showing that the price of diesel, your cost of electricity is going up, your shipping costs, your bunker costs, all of it is going into a direction which is very concerning for us. So the cost of export is sitting at a very high base. It has come down to some level over the year or two, but certainly still very, very high. And if one looks at electricity as an example, it's not a very comforting outlook on that front. So we've got to be mindful that those are also having an impact. Phytosanitary compliance also goes back to bilateral trade, and I think it's also, speaks to what we said about the pests and those sort of things and having to comply. And I think certainly on that front, if one looks at the compliance of our industry around the citrus black spot and false coding moth, amongst others, into Europe, we've actually been on the front foot of those. And kudos to all the people that have been involved, and we've got such good systems in place. And it's great that we're able to implement that so the industry can remain in compliance with that. And then obviously harvest quality, product sizing speaks for itself. I mean, it changes from one year to the next. Last year, there was quite a few issues around quality, product sizing. And this year, we certainly got feedback that the quality looks very good, the product sizing looks very good across the board. So we're excited to see a good crop this year. Biosecurity is another very interesting one. There's some very interesting things around the biosecurity front. And I think, if anything, I would request or ask the stakeholders to keep very close to the Citrus Research International around what's happening on the biosecurity front. The globalization is moving pests and diseases globally quite rapidly. So, but again, we've got such good research with the CRI that it's comforting that we're able to obviously keep a good industry intact. Anything on that front, you guys, before we move on?
No, we are closely involved because we do quite a bit of stuff together with CRI, so we know what's going on the ground. And the interesting thing is we're busy wrapping up a video with Hannes Bester about exactly that. Look at increasing your quality of your fruit instead of your quantity.
100%. And that's why I follow your channels. You guys are involved with some very interesting things. And everyone who's online or anyone watching this, I'd go back and watch a lot of the Lucentlands podcasts. Are very, very interesting. So moving on to logistics now and bringing into context this growth. And before we move on there, I also need to be very specific around, South Africa. We're a very big country, if you think about it. We grow citrus from one end of the country to the other. In the Western Cape, you will know, right from the Boland area into the Northern Cape. We also right through the Eastern Cape from Potensi into Sanders River, Kirkwood area into Eastern Cape Midlands, Natal, Southern Natal, Northern Natal, into Swaziland, right through Mpumalanga, Limpopo. Also very interestingly, there's some very significant crops being produced in Mozambique, up north of Mozambique. I've got relations who've got investments there, very big investments. Into Zimbabwe, that just over the Bay Bridge border, there's significant farmers growing there, and there's also very strong growth happening in Zimbabwe as well. Re-establishment of crops north of Harare as well.
Yeah, and Zimbabwe is pushing investment in the citrus sector.
Very much so, yeah. And then Botswana is an interesting one. There's a lot of growth happening there as well. I'm very interested to actually go and have a look and just see what's being established there, because obviously the more that's been grown there, it pushes pressure down towards Durban, and that's why we're going to talk about Maputo at some point in the in the discussion. So,
but I've also heard about
there's-
the Trans-Kalahari railroad
Yes.
they're busy fixing up, so that could also go towards Walvis Bay side.
Yes, we've done some economics of it. I think the cost challenges still remain there. And that's really where one of the things are. But just coming back to the slide, so we have three very key and distinct what we call corridors. So key export corridors. So we have the Western Cape corridor, which most of your Western Cape, Northern Cape fruit is coming out of the Cape Town port. The Eastern Cape region, mostly going out of the Kucha and PE ports. And a lot of fruit from the northern region, as you can see, it's probably 50-60% of fruit is coming from the northern corridor, and mostly I would say up to, if we look at last year, 90% is going out of the Durban port. And then the corridors do sort of tend to migrate across each other as we see complexity in the logistics chain or shipping challenges. You find fruit is moving between the ports, which they have to, so they can get their fruit to market if there's any challenge of one corridor to the next. So when we talk about logistics and some of the projects that I'm going to speak about in the subsequent sessions, I'm going to break it up into the three corridors so we know what's happening on these corridors from a growth perspective, what are the key logistics challenges and opportunities on these corridors, because it's quite interesting that all three corridors operate very different supply chains, very, very different from each other. The characteristics are completely different. If we talk about distance for number one, road and rail, we talk about the port dynamics, we talk about cold store dynamics, access to markets, shipping opportunities, certain lines go to certain ports and don't go to others. So it's going to be interesting to unpack that as well. Any questions on that front?
No, not at the moment.
Oh, good. Great.
The only
I
region
have-
not growing.
I have a random question. Is there
Yes,
any
go ahead,
citrus? Is there any citrus in the Free State?
Free State would be interesting. I know that Fall Hearts, I always get confused if Fall Hearts falls in the Free State or if it's in the Northern Cape. I think it's
in the northwest or the Northern Cape. It's not in the Free State. Because it's just interesting to look at that map and see lots and lots of little citrus segments all around the country, but there's this absolute nothing in the Free State. So interesting. Just, I know it's not. It's just a random question.
Yeah.
But the fact that there's so much of it happening all around our borders as well is quite remarkable.
Louise, there could very well be citrus there, but if it's not in a condensed area or have any significant volume, it's not really registered in a key area that we have. But you probably find that there is a likelihood that there is citrus there. It could be locally for local markets, not necessarily for export. But I know the Free State is a very big area on, I know cherries, the other berries, and I know apples certainly come out of the Free State in quite big numbers as well.
Yes, and the joke is it's called the Orange Free State. There ain't no oranges there. Remember somebody saying a while ago, they're now producing oranges next to the Orange River. So, if you're driving past there with a child, they say, oh, is that why it's called the Orange River? Just to confuse the issues. Sorry, I'm just bringing in a bit of obtuse comments here. But that's a very good map. It's a very good map, and it illustrates very well where everything is, and then also across the border. Thank you.
Yeah, 100%. And it's also good to keep the session lively, so we keep people interested. So the banter is quite lekker. Gerald, I think you had a comment there.
I was going to ask the same question.
Okay, perfect. Yes, so I think going forward, at the moment, we don't really have a good visibility on Botswana, certainly. Mozambique, we have a certain amount of visibility in Zimbabwe, but not all of it. So we need to capture that data, because certainly it's going to, when it starts to be produced, and I'm guessing it's going to start now into the next 3 years. And if we don't get Maputo operating and hopefully, places like Bara, as you mentioned, they devolved over to Walvis Bay, some of the other port opportunities, it's going to saturate Durban. And we've got to try and work together to circumvent that, because Durban is under a lot of pressure. And as we move forward, I'm going to show you that the vision on logistics and shipping this year is a bit of a concern, particularly around Durban. So we've got to watch that very closely as well.
Mitchell, I have a question or a comment, and that is, I think my involvement with the citrus industry has also made me realize that CGA isn't just South African Citrus Growers Association. It's the Southern African Citrus Growers Association. So the CGA's operations they aren't just in South Africa. I know that you include Eswatini, well, what used to be called Swaziland, and also Zimbabwe. And if I remember correctly, I think that some other countries have joined recently. I'm not sure. Can you please clarify?
Yes. So how it works is it's a statutory levy that comes through the National Agricultural Marketing Council, administered by the CGA for the Department of Agriculture. So every carton has to pay that levy to the CGA, and there's obviously it administers that budget to various different programs. The under correction, but I think I'm right that Zimbabwe is a voluntary and Eswatini is a voluntary levy that they give through. They choose a certain menu of services, not all of the services that the CGA provide, and they administer and pay the royalty to the levy to. I believe Botswana is now joining onto the CGA, and I don't know about Botswana at this. I mean Mozambique, but hopefully when you get Justin on with market access, you can maybe ask a bit more on that. But I know it's voluntary, and I know, yes, I believe it's Botswana that joined, and Zimbabwe certainly have joined on a voluntary basis now.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that.
Okay, so as we move over now to the actual carton volumes, now look, it's difficult for me to try and put presentations where the level of detail is needed, but you obviously can't see the numbers. And I'm going to put my glasses on because I'm back to see it myself. But I've learned this presentation enough that I know what's actually detailed in here. But just to help, because yes, if you want to, you can obviously get a copy of this presentation, because I think it's very important. This specific one in the next slide is probably the two most important numbers that people would like to see. So as I mentioned, we've broken the growth rate into the corridors. And if we look at the top, it's the Northern Corridor, which is mostly going to go to Durban or Maputo, the Eastern Cape Corridor, the Western Cape, and then South Africa in total. I've also broken it down to the main commodity types, so you can see where the growth is coming in by commodity. I've also showed some historical data on volume exports and showing you the tree census in terms of the age of trees, because that's very important to know that which trees are sitting, let's say, younger than 5 years as a portion and going to be representative of some growth. So if we look at the northern regions, I'll go through the totals, and then if there are any questions around specifics, you can ask them. So this is a very interesting one. And as I mentioned, Durban last year had a very low export year. So if you look at the northern region historically, it peaked up to about 88 to 89 million cartons in around 2021, 2022, and that put a lot of pressure in Durban. We're going back to 2020, 21. In 2022 and 23, there was a low base export of about 80. It went to about 82 to 84 million cartons. And that's why Durban had a very low base last year. But certainly going forward, if we look at that growth, it shows an output of 108 million cartons likely to come from the northern regions into the ports in the next 5 years. Now, that is a substantial growth rate, and that's why I emphasized the northern region earlier on, and I'm going to speak a lot about the northern region in our sessions, that growth rate is going to need to be managed very, very carefully. It's another 20-some-odd million cartons. And you would remember now that I've mentioned about Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, not having the clear numbers that we need to get so that we can start to plan the logistics, because I think there's going to be some constraints around Maputo and Bara, and we're talking about the Trans-Kalahari corridors, that it's going to negate or require this fruit to come down to Durban and to some extent to Maputo. So we've got to watch that closely. And it's coming from Valencias, the late mandarins, and lemons to a certain extent. The Eastern Cape has grown phenomenally over the last couple of years from a base of around 14 million. You can see last year into 2023, about 48 million cartons, and going up to about 54, 55 million cartons. So they're at the top end of their growth rate. I think the lemons have probably still got some way to go, because there was substantial plantings of lemons, and late mandarins certainly coming out of Potensi. Now, what we know in the Eastern Cape is we know the drought issues that have been prevalent there, and they've had a lot of good rain. So we're expecting a very good crop to come out of Eastern Cape this year. So we're going to watch that very closely as well. In the Western Cape, the growth rate has mostly been on late mandarins, from a base of around 13 million, expecting last year about 34, and then going up to 44 to 45 million cartons into the future. And late mandarins are very much the growth that's coming from that area. And then obviously, the grapefruit and all that fruit that's been grown in the Northern Cape area, which is also coming through. So you can see the growth rates in Eastern Western Cape. To some extent, yes, it's good, but our real focus needs to be the northern region. That's where it's going to come from. That's why I split it by corridor, that we've got to focus on that. So if you look at the South African in total, you can see the base there, 150 million in 2020. Look at that jump to 163 million, and then last 2022, 164. Last year was about the same. I haven't put 2023 data in. And then going through from a base volume, I've put 166 million cartons. It goes up to 207 to 208 million cartons over the next 5 years. And you can see there trees, which are still younger than 5 years old, 26,000 hectares, representing about 34%. So a lot of young trees still coming into production, and there's another 41 million cartons coming into the system. So yeah, so that's very interesting detail. I don't know if you have any. In fact, you know what? If you have any comments, just wait for the next slide, because listen, the next slide is actually the most important one for you guys. We put the two together. So what this represents, I did a very interesting exercise. I looked at the peak production right down to every single area across the country, every single commodity. What was their peak over the last 3 years, to see, okay, why was the peak there, and why is it still there? Was it not there? Was it likely to come? So if you look at the production in 2023, 164 million cartons, you can see based on the different corridors, the different categories there. We look at the northern regions, got 81, as I showed you, Eastern Cape about 47, Northern Cape about 35, and you can break it down to the different categories there. If we take that now, look into the peak production between 2020 and 2023, looking at, as I say, break it down to that level. Look at what we're seeing there. If we look at the impact, look at the northern region between the Valencias, the 36.4 and the 42. Why has that been? Because the Lesotho area in particular has had a low sort of output yields, as well as Hoedspruit. The Limpopo River last year had a bit of a lower yield, but the peak has been 42. So if we break that across all of the different regions, look what it tells us. We're sitting on an imminent 182 million cartons if, by chance, everything favors our harvesting and our production and the exports and markets and demand, shipping, logistics, costs. We're sitting in an imminent 182 million cartons, but that doesn't end there. Let's go to the next slide. If you look at the production in the short term, now if I add what we bring into it in terms of the lemons and late mandarins, if we look at each year, it's about 5 or 10% growth just on those categories. Look where it takes us. The northern region is 97 million cartons. Now, can you imagine from the year of 81 million cartons to 97 million cartons? That is a substantial jump. And I'm sitting here, I've actually just got some cold sweats and the hair is coming up in the back of my head, because that's a very, very big jump. The Eastern Cape going up to 50 million and the Northern Cape going to 38 with 186 million cartons. So I'm not saying it's going to happen, not saying it's not going to happen, but it certainly shows us that we have a very short-term yield that is going to come at some point, should all of our everything come into alignment. There's a lovely term which it's missing off my mind at the moment, which brings that into context. But that's what we're sitting at. And then the next line down, you look at the 2027 outlook going to then 207 million cartons. Again, look at the northern region bouncing up to 108 million cartons, Eastern Cape to 54 million, and the Northern Western Cape to 44 million. So I'll let you digest on that for a second. I'm sure you've got a few. Also, the hair's probably coming off in the back of your head, and you might have a few questions. And I'm sure all the people in the audience must be looking at this also thinking, wow, that's significant. Yeah.
So,
and that makes Vision260 so important.
Mitchell, out of a curiosity point, what is the break-even cost at the moment per box, as an average across all the varieties?
I think your best reference for that would be the BFAP reports, where they've managed to capture a lot of that sort of detail. I don't have those numbers specifically, but we're also going to bear in mind it's not a one-size-fits-all, because a farm that sits up in Zimbabwe, 1,800 kilometers from a port, is a little bit different in terms of its break-even than, let's say, a farmer sitting in Potensi, which is 80 kilometers from the port. You're paying a difference of 14, 15, 16 rand a carton on transport. So a break-even is a very difficult one to get. You've got to really look it down to farm level. And then there's other things. That's just the first one that comes to mind in terms of that. You know, there's production costs will go up and down different areas and that sort of thing. So it's difficult to answer that one. Yeah.
The reason why I'm asking that is obviously the more you produce, the more it's going to cost. So
not necessarily. Remember, economies of scale, eh? Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I might have made a completely nonsense statement.
Well, essentially, it costs more because to produce 1 million cartons, let's say it's R1 a carton, and if you
Yes.
produce 2 million, it's going to cost you 2 million. But your return on that 2 million cartons might be, more substantial than just producing 1 million. But
If your quality is there, if your quality is there with no claims,
yeah,
what I want to say is that if growers produce higher quality with less claims, they should have a bigger return on the lower quality they produce.
yes. So this is again your earlier question around, where is this growth coming from? I think it's coming from perhaps some sort of preferential pricing that might have happened in that boom cycle. I think it also comes down to economies of scale. And I think economies of scale might be the precedent set on growth, because to produce fruit now, as we've looked at, the cost impact is substantial over the last couple of years. Now you've got to try and keep your costs low, so you try and produce more, so your overheads, are catered for over a bigger crop than smaller. You also look at the density of orchards. The density is looking good, and you're getting very good tonnage turnouts on orchard and per hectare now than you were a couple of sort of years ago as well.
Mm.
So I think there's a lot of those sort of factors that are going to play.
And then the $1 million question is, are there enough mouths to eat all of this fruit?
Then that's where I'm going to encourage Justin to come on your platform, because Justin is, and we can talk logistics and everything. If you don't have people to buy the fruit, it's really going to be a problem. So we've got to have market access, market retaining, market growth. And we're even talking market promotions is going to be extremely vital to make sure that there's, as you say, sufficient mouths to eat the fruit. If you look at South Africa, our growth rate is there, and it's quite visible. What's happening in the other parts of the world? What's happening in Egypt? What's happening in Chile, in Argentina, Morocco, those sort of places, also showing quite strong growth. So we've got to be at the forefront of making sure that we have really good quality fruit, getting it to market. We're having some discussions with supermarket chains. They're very concerned about our state of our ports. So we've got to turn all of those situations around, not only just about mouths to feed, but making sure we get the fruit to those mouths to eat them as well. It's equally important.
Yeah.
And good quality fruit. Yeah.
Sure. Wow. It is very, very interesting.
Yeah. So guys, let's move on. We're almost at the end of this session. I'm going to now show you this very interesting detail, because what this does is, if we unpack now this volume that we're expecting, we want to show what is it doing in terms of the production cycle. And as I say, each region has its own production cycle, and in terms of the growth, it's going to manipulate that cycle in different ways. And here's a very classical example. So this is the northern region, and the lines that you're seeing there, those light blue lines, are the historical base from 2021, 22, 2023. And you can see how those lines go up and down. And, just for those who are probably querying, if you look at the light line week between 2021, week 28, that was the July unrest, if I'm not mistaken. You can see how that production came down. And then it happened again. I think it was the Transnet strike at that point, week 32. You look at the April floods, the 2022, was it? Around week 16. So that's why you're seeing those big numbers go up and down. There's been some very big impacts there. So if you look at the cycle in terms of the commodity boom, I've used a very even sort of line out so that I can take those dips up and down away. You look at the early season, and this is the interesting thing. Look at what's happening in the north from week 2. Already the North Limpopo area is producing lemons. So lemons are now starting as early as, in fact, they were started 2 weeks ago. So the first or second week of January, we're now into the export programs. Our season officially starts. So our seasons are now very much more widespread. I remember when I first started, week 16, 17 was when we actually really started to get the grapefruit. But because of that increase in lemons, and because the early season production from North Limpopo, let's tell you, Hoedspruit, those lemons are now coming in. You can see that cycle in early part of the season. Then we move into the grapefruit cycle around week 14, 15, peaking around week 18. Coupled with that, the start of the navels up in the Sendbes area. And then you see the early season mandarins coming out there as well. Some other categories, novas, clementines, satsumas. And then you start moving into the navel season. And you can see there the cycle is still at a sort of lower point. But let's see what happens now in week 25, week 26, going to week 29. What is happening there? So coupled with the growth in the late Mandarin, which is your, as I mentioned, your Nadurkot, your Clemengold, your Tangos, the two main ones, your Uris, which are being grown in significant numbers up north. Let's tell you, growing a huge amount of Valencias. Look at what it's going to do to our peak. From the north, it's going to put from about 4 million cartons per week up to about 6 million cartons a week going to be produced and put into the system. And that's going to happen because if you look at the pack houses which are being implemented at the moment across the north, they're increasing capacity. And it's being done on the back of the late Mandarins and Valencias. So that's really going to be our trouble point, is how are we going to manage that cycle? We either going to have to increase in capacity infrastructure, which, as you can see, that cycle is very short. Who's going to invest huge amounts of money on that? We also maybe need to talk about producers around lessening that cycle. Are we able to produce earlier lemons, at least late Mandarins, Valencias? Are we able to get the season to be a bit later? Can markets adapt to that? We don't know. Are we having to divert fruit to other ports like Cape Town and Maputo? So as we move into that cycle, and I can show you now this year, that cycle is going to come. It's going to come into the 5.5 million, if I hear from our growers. So we need to catch that very early, and we're going to need to be very careful how we manage that. So that's the northern region. And as I said, we're still going to bring into it the growth in Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Mozambique. Because remember, Mozambique, although they've got the Maputo port, they don't really have the market access on the shipping at the moment. So I've spoken to the producers there, and I've said to them, look, you really need to start to think about your logistics and where you're going to move your fruit through to gain access to markets. They can go to the Middle East, they're quite good at the moment, but what do they do when they go to Europe, Canada, Europe, and all those sort of markets? So that's
up in Africa,
yes,
like road transport supplying the African market, is there demand for that?
Yeah, that's also been a very interesting one that's been deliberated internally around growth in the African market. You know, there's going to need to be some strong focus on growth in African markets, just so we can, you know, obviously have alternative export markets for the fruit. And obviously, it makes sense to produce and sell as close to your farm as you can. But yeah, so that will be an interesting discussion going forward. And this is why I've been focusing on the northern region, because you don't see this peak in the other regions, which I'm going to show you in the following slide. So yeah, as we move into the Vision 260 and unpack it, a lot of that is going to be around that cycle. So if we move now down to the Eastern Cape, as I mentioned to you, you can see the growth there is not as prolific as what we've seen in the north. The lemons which were planted there have by and large come to the end of its growth cycle. There's some late sort of category Cambrias on the navels which are still coming, and Valencias to some extent. But it doesn't look impactful here. But if you take the numbers over the weeks, that's where your sort of extra 10 million cartons are coming in. So I believe, you know, from a production point of view, I don't see we're going to see massive peaks of what we've seen in the north, but certainly it's a well-stretched production cycle. And certainly you're going to see some pressure around there, the week 22, 23, and obviously the later part of the season when the Valencias overlap with those late Mandarins as well. But the production side works very nicely. And you see those blue lines as you keep going up and down. There's also been around rain, some of the labor unrest in that area, and port issues and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's what makes those lines go up. Now, every area has got its own, you know, different set of variables that happen through the season. So we can manage that quite well. I think the Eastern Cape, there's going to be two problem points as we go down into the slides: your cold store capacity and your port issues. You know, the PE port's very small in terms of capacity. We had a lot of trouble there last year. The Cook port as well, limited in capacity, and so that we're going to need to follow through.
When you talk about capacity,
so the Eastern Cape ports, the actual terminal capacity. So look at the Cook port. You know,
is the containers standing on the ground or at the rate they can load them?
I think it's coupled to both. So, you know, the interesting thing about this is that the cold stores are located and the production points are very close to the port. So most of the production points, you know, the pack houses are packing straight from their pack houses to the port directly, not even going to a cold store. Either cold stores are on the pack house or they load ambient or go to, say, the Enno cold store, PE cold store, Cook cold store close to the port. Right next to the port is the cold stores. So their time frames of loading and penetrating the port is less than half an hour. In most cases. So that's where the problem comes, is their turnaround and throughputs are highly constrained. And then the Kucha port, penetrating that terminal is problematic. There's a truck booking system coming in this year. If you've been on the conversation with other ports' truck booking systems, we're concerned about that. And then the plug point capacity, just in terms of being able to handle the containers into the terminal to have sufficient plug-in points for there is a problem. So that region, we're going to specifically talk with Transnet about increasing their capacity.
And also then
I think that's mostly the constraints.
With the phytosanitary issues and additional cold storage needed for oranges, it's not available there, if I'm correct.
Yes, that will be a discussion point when we get down to that. That I picked up for this year. It is on a red flag. Yeah. And then moving to the Western Cape. As you can see there, I've shown you the lake mandarins are growing quite well. I have a suspicion that we're not showing enough growth on those lake mandarins, because when I go down there to the Western Cape, I see orchards and orchards and orchards of this stuff being grown right up on the Boland area into the Citrusdal area. So maybe as we move on, those trees will still be registered. In fact, if we look at the latest tree census, maybe that'll be captured in there. But certainly you can see there's quite a bit of growth coming in the later part of the season on the lake mandarins. The early season, on the Satsumas, Clementines, Novas, not too much growth there. You can certainly see on the navels as well, some good growth there, and also the later variety Cambria. One of the positive things for the Western Cape, and yes, we talk about the constraint of the port at the moment, but as I've comforted our CGA board and many in the industry, is that by April, the impasse in Cape Town is rectified. The capacity that's available in the Western Cape from a cold store perspective, from transport, trucking, from the port capacity itself having 3,500 or 3,000 plug points, double what Durban has. We don't really have a capacity and infrastructure problem in the Western Cape. And in my view, I think we've got a lot of spare capacity to manage that. We don't have the wind as prolific as we have it at the moment. And we've also got some very good cold store and rail projects coming in that area quite soon. So the Western Cape for me is not too much of a problem, but we have got some focus going to be happening there for the current year. So we have a representation of all the ports. So
I also think I also think what happened is there's a lot of farmers in the area, particularly in our area, that has planted like 2 or 3 hectares of citrus. They took out 1 or 2 blocks of wine grapes, and they put in 2 or 3 blocks of citrus as like something. And I might be completely wrong. I don't think those people are all part of the CGA, or all those figures are come through, because there's a lot.
You're 100% correct. In fact, I was on one of Abspan Roy, who is very big into the Clementville. He's bought quite a number of wine farms, which he's converted into citrus farms. I was on one of his farms last year before, and you see it quite a lot around there. Beautiful homesteads, and there's citrus on there, which you normally would see wine vineyards. So I do think, yes, at the moment, there is, in fact, a lot of the farmers in the Western Cape who want to see as farmers are now citrus farmers, and that's why we get involved in the Western Cape in the current seasons, because our farmers are asking us to, because they aren't just citrus and deciduous, they are fruit farmers, so we help them. And yes, I think a lot of those farmers are going to come into the system very shortly with their young trees having to be registered, starting to pay levies. And I do think we're going to see a lot more growth in your area down there with that particular variety.
And just a question, just a question. We've spoken a lot about exporting the actual fruit here. Is there a big demand that a lot of this fruit can be converted to, let's say, juice or other products, and have that exported?
Definitely. So, it's always a good conversation you have with growers when we see a lower sort of export yield. They say, well, the juice pricing is very good. So they've converted their product to juicing and concentrate and those sort of things. So, as I say, there's cycles that happen. Every year has got its own characteristic around market demand, pricing trends, local market, juicing, all those kind of things which can impact the export sort of yield. Because remember, I've showed you there's 182 million cartons which should be coming out. We're only exporting 163. So there's essentially 20 million cartons somewhere. Is it juice? Is it concentrate? Have they had to dump it? Left it on the tree? So that is interesting. But we don't really get involved with that. I know there's been an initiative internally in the CGA to get more involved with the local market. I don't quite know where that is now. Albert Kutsia has just joined us. I believe it will be part of his portfolio, and to grow the domestic market in Africa. The juicing and concentrate, we're not involved with that at all. But yes, that all depends on, I suppose, quality and trying to the pricing when it's favourable, they'll put more towards those sort of segments. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that was a mouthful.
Isn't it interesting, eh?
Yes.
It's going to keep us all on our toes for a good while to come. And I'll tell you what, my toes, and as I said to you, the hair on the back of my, when I see this presentation, as many times as I give it, the hair still stands on the back of my neck because, as you know, I'm in the portfolio of logistics and shipping, and that's just one part of it. It's what do I say? It's exciting at one point, but nerve-wracking at the other. It's a very strange feeling.
Yeah. Louise, your mic is muted, I think, or gone. I think
Louise, nothing I don't see anything on the chat box, or was anybody actually engaged in the session? I don't see any sort of feedback.
There's been people. There was people coming and going throughout. Well, we're sitting in 1 hour and 5 minutes, which is actually, well, I've got no problem with that. But I think a lot of people.
First session.
Yes, I think people will watch it tonight. Well, there's no more CM Milan on TV, so when one of those soapies that the wives might be watching, the husbands might be tuning in to listen to what we spoke about.
Well, the last thing, and that's why I'm grateful for you doing this, because I've said to Justin, we need an online platform to host this because it's so important. We need to get as much coverage of it as possible. So I'm going, and then you will be sharing on your LinkedIn, and I'll be forwarding and sharing all of your platforms on my platforms, so that we can get it as far as wide. Because this is only the first session. There's another 5 to come, and as we move down there, you're going to see how more interesting it gets.
Yeah.
So we need to have that exposure.
We're really looking forward.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Okay.
And by the way, guys,
I'm gonna kill the stream. I'm gonna kill the stream because we're still live, and then we can have a quick wrap up by ourselves. But thank you again. This has been very interesting, and we are looking forward to the next one.
And thank you to everybody who's watching. And please feel free to reach out to me if you need my contact details. In fact, we could probably put it somewhere if you'd like more information, or just have a copy of the presentation. Yeah.
Do you want to give out yourself? Do you want to give out your cell phone number or not?
Well, you know, I have that WhatsApp channel that I run. I now have 123 members, and by the end of March, I'm hoping to have 500. So
I'll put that link in the. I'm going to put that link in the comments, and then people can click on it. I'm scared that you might be inundated at like 1 o'clock in the morning about what's happening in Alba.
I don't sleep, dear Lord. I'm 24/7 guy, on it all the time. Thanks.
Yeah, but your wife and your children might be sleeping, and then they are mad at you.
I won't make a comment. Thank you, man.
Okay. Thanks, guys.